Welcome, welcome, one and all, to a brand new segment, one that I'd like to call Stuck in Quarantine, Lost in Time. Indeed, this latest pandemic of historical scale has affected far more than just my part time employment and my graduation ceremony. It has also affected this very project, if you can believe it. Originally, when I set out to do this, I thought, what better way than to collect video and audio from the various places that my family, my ancestors, lived in, hailed from. Nowhere across the sea, seeing as all of them at one point lived in Europe. But when they immigrated here to the States, they selected places like New York, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Maryland, and Texas, just to name a few places that I could get to rather easily, far easier than at the time that I'm recording, which is in the middle of the pandemic. And sure, I could, collect pictures from the internet and use those, but it just wouldn't be as personal. Uh, it'd be the places all right, but it would be somebody else's experience, and I'm trying to catalog my experience. And it also would just be, a nice feeling to stand where they stood, presumably, and that was gonna be my spring break. The next best thing would be to make something relevant. Not only relevant today, but relevant to tomorrow. Relevant to the people of the future who would go back and look at us now in the middle of this pandemic. Which is how we got here, which is how we got to this more informal, off the cuff sort of narration. And I realized that by doing the project this way, I sort of miss out on a killer introduction, I gotta say. Granted, this was back when I was still going to do that whole road trip idea. For as long as humans have roamed the earth, they have given chase. Prior to the domestication of animals, humans chased their food, the food that was capable of being chased, that is. With each passing invention, physical or otherwise, humans became less reliant on this early strategy for their survival. The desire to chase remained, however. During the Cold War, for instance, the United States and the Soviet Union both chased the stars. In the absence of prey, mankind's predatory nature has given way to an unquenchable thirst for knowledge, for a deeper understanding of the unknown. For some, one's own family history is just as elusive and mysterious as the dark vastness of space. Genealogy companies such as Ancestry.com and 23andMe have helped those individuals discover seemingly lost relatives, or in some cases, completely debunk myths long held by members of their families. I myself have been using Ancestry.com to do the former. Yeah, needless to say, something a lot more elegant, epic even, than what I'm doing right now. It's fine though. We're fine. Now, during the early days of this project, I was admittedly aimless. The tree kept growing, the tree kept expanding, seemingly to no end, and I had no idea who or what or when to focus on. I wouldn't know where to start looking until I sat down with my mother, who has effectively become the matriarch of the family historian. She knows a lot. But yeah, so I basically came to you because I consider you the family historian. I mean, I know we don't have much else in terms of family to talk about this sort of stuff about, but typically if I have a question about the family, you're the one who I can most reliably trust to give me that information. So, who then, if anyone, was the family historian before you were?
I would probably have to say my grandmother, my father's mother.
And I don't suppose you would know who was family historian before she was?
Honestly, I'm not 100% sure because maybe her sisters and brothers as well contribute to their own immediate families because a lot of the family passed on. And so that's who we now get our information from. So for me now, it would be great uncles and great aunts that I would get the information from.
And I bring this up because, of course, myths and whatnot get spread around through family.
Correct.
For instance, I have a professor, the one who's teaching this class, said that the myth around his family tree was that, they were from Wales and they've been here since the beginning and they were on the Mayflower and such.
Correct.
And it wasn't until they, had a family historian, like an actual historian, look into it that they realized that that wasn't exactly the case. So what was your perception of our family before you took the ancestry test 2 Christmases ago?
Well, I would have to say that the information that I was given was incorrect because I think the knowledge that was shared with me was basically because of that particular family's heritage and also the ignorance in the sense of not knowing information was that it's science and that genetics comes from both sets of parents, not just one. So therefore I was told my entire life that I was Native American, and once we took the ancestry test I learned that I was not Native American, but my great grandmother is full Comanche Indian. So I unfortunately did not get that trait. So that is something that I carried with me up until 2 Christmases ago. So once we took the ancestry test, your father also learned that he was not half Italian. He's only 7% Italian and not Italian like he was told his entire life. So we did get a lot of misinformation.
Okay. And I suppose, was that what you were looking for when you took the tests? Validation that you were part Native American and that our father was half Italian?
I was actually looking to get confirmation of that because I thought it was important because you ask, what your heritage is and your sisters ask what their heritage is, and it would be really nice to be able to give you the most accurate information.
And needless to say that you were surprised by these results?
Oh my gosh, yes. I was very surprised by my results that I was 77% English, 17% Scottish, and I believe 3% African. So, quite a surprise, but very interesting nonetheless.
Okay. And were there any other myths that were perpetuated throughout your family that couldn't be verified or denied through the ancestry test?
I think that on my mother's side, they really didn't talk very much about their ancestry. They were just mostly interested in the here and now. So I really didn't get a whole lot of information from that side. So there really wasn't much to go on with regards to that side of the family. And then also the other thing that I was told was that we were German. That's another thing, and that's where my last name came from. But in fact, my maiden last name is English. So therefore, being 77% English and my last name being English makes complete sense. So.
Okay. And that's just an example of your family. Do you have one from, say, dad's side of the family?
So an interesting piece of information, not a myth, but whenever your dad's grandfather came to the United States, as he was born in Italy, Sicily to be exact, his full name is Guido Ross Jerome DiGirolamo. But when he came to the United States, he had to change his name so that he could work. So his name then became G.R. Jerome. So therefore, he was able to work and take care of his family.
But yeah, for all that knowledge that she had about my father's side of the family, there was very little to say about her own, surprisingly. Which you'd think if you'd know anyone's history would be your own, but that was not the case here. And with that, I had my mission. And that was to tell their story. And at long last, we reach the part of the video where we analyze and dissect the Fritz family tree. Now, judging from how sparse this is, it's safe to say that we're towards the top of the family tree. Not only that, but just look at the ages in which some of these individuals were born. John Noe, Mary Ayres, Sidney Cindery. 1737, 1742, 1730. So this is just before the point where documentation of these people's lives is non-existent. So we're towards the top, but not the very top, because there's still something to support that all the people here existed. The main focus of this video is this gentleman right here, John Noe, born 1737, died 1826. He is related to me on my mother's side, the side that I said that I would try to dig up more information about. And if we travel down the tree, we can see exactly how. So he and Mary were presumably married, and they had a daughter by the name of Elizabeth. There's no record of Elizabeth ever having a husband, but she did have a son by the name of John Noe Kuntz, who, when he married Sarah Moshburn, they had Jarman Kuntz. And when he married Sarah Mitchell, they had Hardy. And when he married Dilsey, they had just a slew of children. Our focus is going to be Henry. When he married Gertrude, he, much like his parents, had many children. Iona would be my great-grandmother. She, when she married Herman, had a pair of daughters, Juanita and Dolores. Dolores, my maternal grandmother. And when she married Sandlin and had my mother, well, that's just it. She's my mother. Now, just to share a few stories before we revisit John, the circumstances surrounding Sandlin's death are interesting. He was born in 1954 and passed in 1980, meaning that he died at the young age of 26. Now, what's interesting about this is the cause of death is a car accident. And I'm not saying that the car accident was staged, as in somebody wanted him dead. It's just very telling of the times that we lived in. This was before the time where seatbelts were heavily regulated. It wasn't until manufacturers took notice of the high volume of crashes that were occurring and the resulting deaths from those crashes. It's not to say that people were worse drivers around this time, or that they were still getting used to the technology. It's just simple science. Any accident that occurs while wearing a seatbelt is far less devastating than one where the driver is not wearing a seatbelt. Regardless of mileage regardless of how fast they were traveling. The seatbelt keeps you secure. The seatbelt keeps you safe. And without one, you're just as likely to go flying as anything else not strapped down to the car. And that is a fate that sadly befell my maternal grandfather. Now, this was hardly a secret. This was common knowledge. This was a story that my mom would share, not involuntarily. It's not an icebreaker. It's not how she'd enter the room with the sad story of her father's passing, but it's one that she would share if you asked. His wife, meanwhile, Sandlin's wife, Dolores, there is no evidence to suggest that she ever actually took his name. Her last name has never been Burnham in any of the documentation. And I asked my professors why this might be, and they suggested that it might have been the result of second wave feminism, which, no pun intended, was making waves in the United States around this time. And this was not such a strict form of feminism that suggested that women shouldn't fall in love, get married, and have children. It simply said that, we're not your property. Me taking your name is a choice. It's not a necessity. It's not a prerequisite for us getting married. Now, her mother, Iona, has another interesting story. She survived the Great Depression. In fact, her whole family, surprisingly, survived the Great Depression. For a disaster that claimed the lives of many, she and others were able to stick it out just fine. At the young age of 2, no less. And as for Henry, the North Carolina native, he actually was in the same state while the Wright brothers were famously testing out their early airplanes. And seeing as though he was in North Carolina at the time, this is something that North Carolina probably reported on far more than any other state in the country. This is something that he would probably follow. Now, his father Hardy was far more likely to keep tabs on the Wright brothers situation as he was of older stock. Henry was only a child when the Wright brothers were testing their technology. Meanwhile, Hardy was a fully grown adult, far more capable of reading a newspaper and finding an interest in these newfangled flying machines. Now, everyone here was in some way affected by the American Revolution. That is their story to tell. My mother's family, my mother's extended family, was around at the time of the American Revolution. Now, some were more involved than others. Specifically, John Noe, my 7th great-grandfather, interestingly enough, participated in the American Revolution. At the age of 38, he was no spring chicken. One of the links, when I clicked it, opened this page. It takes you here. This is the family records or genealogies of the first settlers of Pasek Valley. And on page 301 is John, Ellis, David, Matthias, Lewis, essentially the whole Noe clan. If it wasn't impressive enough that my 7th great-grandfather served in the American Revolution and lived to tell about it, a university, a young university at that, thought it was necessary to put his story to paper, to write it down and preserve it for future generations. And I could not be more grateful, because now that piece of the puzzle that my mother thought was missing, the story of heritage that my siblings sought to know. It's here. It's right here. My professor spoke at length about a book, his family book. And sure, there may have been some falsehoods presented throughout, and there might very well still be some falsehoods present in this book. But at least now my mother's side of the family has some semblance of an identity. I don't know how on earth they thought they could be German when they're as English as they possibly could have been. At least now we know.